Sometimes our understanding of theological terms gets confused a little bit because we start using theological words for all kinds of other purposes. And this regrettably happens often with the word incarnation. The word gets used in daily conversation about all kinds of trivial things. When he dances, he's the incarnation of gracefulness. It's often used in the media. I heard recently there was a Christmas movie that we were watching the other day, and as they introduced it at the beginning, they said that this book retells an old story that we know well. It is the latest incarnation of the old fairy tale. For those of you who are James Bond fans, I was reading a little earlier this week that Daniel Craig's incarnation as 007 is coming to the end after 5 movies, and they're now looking for the next actor who will incarnate 007 in the next James Bond sequel. I'm told that in recent years it's even started to be used in computer science and object-oriented programming. They're starting to talk about incarnation as they're doing computer programming. And of course, sometimes the word gets used in heavier topics. How often have you heard that Adolf Hitler or Idi Amin were the incarnation of pure evil? And then there are the strange and completely unbiblical meanderings about reincarnation, where people think that they are so much like their great-great-grandfather or so much like an old military general that they think that they are that person reincarnated, and they get to live their lives over and over again until they get it right. Well, I want to clear that up very quickly. Hebrews 9:27 tells us that it's appointed for men to die once, and after that, the judgment. So don't listen to what the mystics say, and I don't care how much you look like your great-great-grandfather. You are not somebody reincarnated. You are your own person, and one day you will give account for your own life when your single life, is done. But in the biblical context, incarnation refers to that one very specific and singular event that we celebrate together at Christmas. We call it the incarnation. Just one. Our English word comes from the Latin incarnatio, the act of being made flesh. And then the word took its almost final form in the Old French from the 13th century, from which we borrowed our full English word, incarnation. You can recognize the same root in other words. We sometimes speak of something being very carnal, related to the body and to fleshly lusts. Incarnation doesn't carry that negative term, but it carries that same root. The inference is that there's something that wasn't flesh that's made flesh. I wanted to read with you this morning one of the key passages of the New Testament that explains the incarnation. It comes in John chapter 1 and beginning at verse 1. And as John begins to lay this out, at first it sounds very much like the text in Genesis 1, except that he goes before Genesis 1. He goes before the moment of creation. Genesis 1 starts at that moment when the world is first created. But John actually goes further back than Genesis 1, further back than the moment of creation, to tell us what was there before the world was made. John chapter 1, and I'll start reading at verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Now John's preparing the way here. He wants to tell us about the moment of the incarnation, but he wants to make sure that we don't misunderstand what's going to happen. The book of Hebrews says that after having spoken to us in many different ways through the prophets and through other human beings, what he does now when he sends his Son is very different and absolutely unique. So before speaking about the incarnation of Christ, John throws in a little parenthesis, and he tells us about one of those who prepared the way for Christ. This is what he says in verse 6. There was a man sent from God, whose name was John the Baptist. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. So John the Baptist was a man. He was just a man. He wasn't the light. He came to bear witness to the light. He was a man sent from God, but he was just a man. This next one who comes is much more than just a man sent from God. Listen now, verse 9. The true light, not the one bearing witness to the light, but the light itself, the true light which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, but his own people did not receive him. To all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And now here comes finally John's description of what happened at that moment of the incarnation. He's prepared us for it. These are the few verses we want to focus on this morning. Verse 14, and the Word became flesh. That Word that was with God in the beginning, that word that created the world, that word that was the light of men, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, this was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me because he was before me. For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. This is the word of the Lord. In that pivotal verse 14, John describes the incarnation with 5 key phrases, and these are the ones I want to focus with you on this morning as we prepare for Christmas. In verse 14, 2 phrases, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Now I want you to notice that there's 2 separate phrases there. They're related, but they're 2 separate, distinct phrases. The second part, that he dwelt among us, actually uses a funny word in the Greek. It's a word that would have reminded the first readers of what happened in the Old Testament. It uses the word tent or tabernacle. You remember the tent of meeting, that portable worship center they had called the tabernacle? It's a fancy word for a tent. And so the text at this point actually says that he tabernacled among us. He pitched his tent among us. We all went camping together, and the Lord was there. He had his tent, and he pitched his tent on our campsite. And this is a powerful reminder of the way God lived among his people at the tent of meeting, at the tabernacle, and as he traveled with them. The tent, the tabernacle, and the Ark of the Covenant that were inside them, they were all visible, tangible reminders of the presence of God. But there's something different here. In the Old Testament, there's a very real sense in which the glorious presence of God, it was called the Shekinah, it was separate from the tabernacle. When the tabernacle was completed, the cloud of the presence of God came to rest upon it, and there were moments when the cloud would lift up and move, and the people would have to pick up camp and follow the cloud that went ahead. In the last few Sundays, we read about Ichabod moments. You remember that poor little boy whose name was Ichabod? The glory has departed. There were moments when the glory of God departed from the tabernacle, and the tabernacle was just an empty tent with pegs and pieces of wood and cloth because God had left. He wasn't there anymore. And so the glory of God was present at the tabernacle. It was present in the temple. It was present with the Ark of the Covenant, but there's a sense in which it was separate from it. But what happens in the incarnation of Christ is completely different. In the coming of Christ, the Word actually takes on human flesh. If I can say this politely, it's no longer that there was a tent in the middle of the people and God would come to live in the tent. God actually becomes the tent. Do you understand the difference? Because this is a vital piece of our faith. The incarnation doesn't just mean that in some way God's Spirit came down and took possession of a human body, and he was kind of like an avatar or a 3D hologram that was sort of the physical manifestation that we saw while God This is not what the incarnation says. The incarnation says that God, the divine, the truly God, truly took on human flesh. Jesus Christ was truly, physically human. And so these are two separate phrases. Yes, he dwelt among us. But more important than that, he actually became human flesh. And then John tells us a third thing about this incarnate Jesus. He not only dwelt among us, he not only became flesh. John says this strange thing, and we have seen his glory. And there's the link to our theme on these past Sunday mornings. We've been thinking together about the glory of God. Quite unexpectedly, Jesus takes on human flesh to manifest to us the elusive glory of God. The glory of God that we have come so far short of because of our sin and our disobedience. Kind of strange, isn't it? You would think that if Jesus was to manifest the glory of God to us, that he would come as a strike of lightning, or he would come as a bolt of light, or he would come as a shimmering, glorious angel with brightness and with... But to show us the glory of God, he takes on human flesh, just like ours. I want you to think for a minute about what John is saying. Jesus comes, he dwells among us, he takes on human flesh, and John says, we have seen his glory. Now, a lot of people, when they hear John say that Jesus came in the flesh and we saw his glory, they say, I know when this happens. There's this moment when Jesus is teaching and he takes Peter and James and John aside and they go up the mountain, and there's this beautiful, glorious moment of the transfiguration. And as Peter and James and John look on, they see Moses and Elijah come down, and the Lord Jesus is transplendent. And you got to love Mark. Mark is the one who throws in these weird, unexpected, very human details. Mark says that Jesus' clothing became brighter than any bleach made of human hands could. I don't know how good you think your Tide detergent is, but Jesus' clothing on this day was brighter and whiter and clean. Anyway, Mark is the one who always throws in these color commentaries. But you would think that must be the moment that John is referring to. That's when they saw his glory. Actually, it's not. It's also very tempting to think that the moment where Jesus shows his glory is at the moment of resurrection, after they've nailed him to the cross and he's died and they laid him in the tomb and he's 3 days in the tomb and he comes back from the dead and that's not the moment when we see his glory in human flesh either, because at that moment there's something peculiar that's happened to his flesh. He is in his resurrection body, and it gives us a glimpse of what our bodies will be able to do when we are risen with him. And he goes through the locked doors of buildings and rooms where the disciples are hiding out under lock and key, and he goes through the walls and he moves from one. But John says that that's not the moment where they saw his glory. They saw his glory in his human flesh. And when you read through the rest of John's gospel, there are two moments where they speak about Jesus manifesting his glory. Repeatedly, John speaks about the way the Lord showed his glory in the miracles that he did. And there was this strange, uncanny thing that there is this one who seemed to be truly human, who had flesh and bone and blood before them, and he did these unbelievable, unimaginable things. He cured a quadriplegic. He restored the sight to the blind. He turned water into wine. He calmed the sea and the storm. And these were moments of unspeakable glory, because they couldn't get their head around, wait, he's this human being, but he's doing this unbelievable stuff. It's very interesting to read the reaction of the disciples when Jesus calms the storm. I've referred to you several times as one of those moments where Jesus' humanity and his divinity is seen close side by side, because exhausted, he falls asleep on the moving boat. He's that tired, kind of like the way I get tired enough sometimes I could actually almost fall asleep on the 161 on the way home. Not quite, but almost. And Jesus is that human that at the end of an exhausting day, he falls asleep. They wake him up because they're afraid they're drowning, and he stands, and with the sound of his voice, he calms the sea and the storm, and he stops the waves, and he stops the wind. wind and everything is dead still. And the disciples have an interesting reaction. They say, "What kind of man is this that even the sea and the waves and the storm listen to him?" And the glory of his miracles was this inexplicableness, that there was this one who was with them in human flesh that they could touch and see and feel, who fell asleep with them on the side of the mountain, who got tired, who ate like they did, and yet he is doing these miracles with the power of God. But ultimately, in John's Gospel, the moment of Jesus' glorification is not his miracles. Repeatedly, the Gospel of John speaks about one moment as being the moment of the Lord Jesus' glory. John refers to the moment of the cross as being the moment where Jesus is glorified more than any other. Even Jesus himself, repeatedly, as he prays to the Father, he looks ahead to his death at the cross, and as he prays to his Father, he says, "The moment has come for you to glorify your Son." When he would be lifted up, raised on the cross, nailed there for our sin. It is to this moment that John refers to when he says, "We have seen his glory." Because it is at that moment, it is in that moment more than any other, that Jesus Christ is set apart from anyone and everybody else. There had been other prophets in the past. There had been other good preachers in the past. There had been others who'd come to speak for God and attempt to lead people back to him. Moses had been used of God to give us the law and show us what we needed to do to please God. But Jesus was the only one who was able to accomplish what he did at the cross. It is his work at the cross that sets him absolutely apart from everybody else. And it is that moment more than any other that is his glory and that exalts him as being entirely unmatched and unique. You remember our text in Philippians 2 last week? After describing the fact that Jesus was willing to go to his death, even death on a cross, after that moment, Paul says, "Therefore, because of that work at the cross, because he was willing and able to do that, God highly exalted him above every other name." And with this fourth statement about the incarnation of Christ, John underlines that uniqueness. "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father." Not only did nobody else do what Jesus did at the cross, but nobody else could have done what Jesus did at the cross. In order to cover for the sins of all humanity, that one death at the cross needed to be a death of absolute, unmatched value in the eyes of God. So that the one who's glorified in his death at the cross is not just another human being, not just one of the prophets, not just a good preacher, not one of the angels as the Quran mistakenly claims. The one who is glorified at the cross is the only Son of the Father. It's funny, there's a shortcut in the Greek here. It is so understood that the only begotten one is the Son that the Greek doesn't actually put the word Son in. The Greek, just as a shorthand, says the only begotten of the Father. In our English translation, add the word Son to make it explicable for us. The glory of the only begotten from the Father. And I have to tell you, I hate to do this to you at Christmas in the middle of Hanukkah and everything else, but this one phrase explains why for us as Christians it's really, really hard to be good ecumenical people. Don't get me wrong. I love my Jewish neighbors and I'm very kind and considerate to them, and I've learned to say Shabbat Shalom as I cross them on Saturday morning, and I like the Hanukkah lights, and particularly here in Cote de Neiges we're surrounded by many good Muslim and Hindu and Buddhist families, and we're kind and we're gracious to them. But the one that we celebrate in the Incarnation, he isn't just one of many. He isn't one of the choices on the menu. If you like to be religious, there's 8 good choices. Pick one and go with that. The one we celebrate in the Incarnation is absolutely, completely, entirely unique because we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father. The other faiths offer great prophets and great teachers and good people and nice ideas for living a good life. But what the Nativity puts before us is God's only begotten Son. Jesus would put that very plainly in words just a few days before his crucifixion. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus affirms that. He affirms that what he and the other, John affirms that what he and the other apostles saw was entirely unique, unmatched, unrivaled, unequaled, the only beloved Son of the Father. And ultimately, he's glorified as he went to the cross to fulfill the Father's will and to fill our redemption, two things that no other person could do. And then John ends the verse by adding a phrase almost directly borrowed from the Old Testament. In the moments in the Old Testament when God revealed his glory most intimately, when he revealed his glory most directly to the people who wanted to know him, he made himself known in two things, his steadfast love and his faithfulness. The Old Testament speaks about his abounding mercy and his fidelity, his compassion and his truthfulness and his faithfulness. And so John ends this pivotal verse by doing something that would have been blasphemous, sacrilegious to his good Jewish hearers. John ends this pivotal verse by ascribing the same two eternal qualities of God the divine to Jesus Christ, God made flesh, truly human, and yet fully carrying the attributes of the divinity. John says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And he uses those two words, full of steadfast love and truth, full of goodness and abounding love and truth. This is the one we worship as we celebrate the Incarnation together. The one who made known God to us. The one who made God real to us. T.F. Torrance was one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century. And as happened to many of the theologians who were studying in seminaries during the 20th century, their great academic careers got interrupted by the First and the Second World War. And Torrance was studying and he wanted to become a theologian, but as he was preparing for that, he had qualified for ministry, and the Second World War happened, and they needed military chaplains. And so Torrance put his books aside in the seminary and he went to the front and he served as a military chaplain. And he was glad that happened because those experiences at the front really made his faith real to him. And the story is told that one day he was on a battlefield in Italy. He was accompanying a couple of detachments as their chaplain, and he got called to the side of a young 19-year-old soldier who was a believer, who was a Christian, and the dying man asked this interesting question. He said, "Padre, chaplain," he said, "is God really like Jesus?" And Torrance thought the question captured the deepest cry of the human heart. We've gotten to know Jesus as a person of grace and kindness and mercy and truth. He's made God real to us. And this young soldier who knew Jesus Christ wanted to know, is this really what God is like? The grace and the redemption I found in Jesus Christ, is this really what God is like on the other side? He was worried that he was going to slip away as his life was coming to an end, and he was going to meet this wrathful, angry God who was still upset at him. And so he wanted to know, is God really like Jesus? And Torrance answered the dying man with these words, God is indeed really like Jesus. There is no unknown hidden God behind the back of Jesus somewhere lurking for us to fear. To see the Lord Jesus in his grace and truth is to see the very face of God. Torrance says that this experience would shape the rest of his ministry, teaching and preaching for years to come. Before I close this morning, for those of you who like to ask me, so what, when I preach about great theological truths like the Incarnation, most of the text we read this morning focuses on the identity of Jesus Christ. But it does mention a couple of other people along the way. We noticed earlier that it mentioned John the Baptist as a kind of contrast so that we understand that John was just a man, but that Jesus was more than that. But the text that we read also mentioned two other groups of people. Two groups of people who reacted very differently to the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. The true light which gives light to everyone is coming into the world. He was in the world, and yet the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. I told you earlier that as Christians, we have a hard time doing ecumenism very well. It's hard for us to do that because, for one thing, we do not believe in the universal brotherhood of man. Not everybody is automatically a child of God. Our sin has deprived us of that right. We have been deprived of the glory of God and of the joy of his presence. But the good news is that God took human flesh to address that issue. And when he came in the flesh, for a variety of reasons, a number of people rejected him, including many of those who were closest to him and who should have recognized him, but didn't. But our text says, but to those who received him, to those who understood that Jesus Christ was truly human, but truly God, he gave the right to become children of God. I wonder this morning, as you prepare to celebrate another Christmas, as you prepare to celebrate the incarnation of God's Son, I wonder if you're preparing to do that as a child of God who has received Jesus Christ for all that he was, or whether you're still on the inside looking in. I wonder this morning whether you've understood who he was and received him as such. Amen.